Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to this panel today. We've got a distinguished group of panelists that have joined us, and the nice thing about this video conferencing era is that we're able to have Brandon Dempsey talking to us from out west, and John Reed down from Florida. And so we've got a nice combination of local and people from out of town. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. And Brandon, why don't you lead us off?
Thanks, Phil. My name is Brandon Dempsey. I'm a husband, father, an adventurer, and an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur part, I own two companies, mainly. One is a marketing firm called Go Brand Go that works with 10 to 25, works from 25 to $250 million privately held companies whose owners are in their 50s and 60s looking to make a successful leadership transition in the next decade or so. They're generally manufacturing distribution, ride a motorcycle, have a couple grandkids, vacation over timeshare someplace, and have already invested in strategic planning. And then the second company we own is actually a real estate development company, and we've got about 50 something units now all over St. Louis that we rent out.
Wonderful. And John Reed?
Hi, Phil, and hello, everybody. My name is John Reed. I am the Senior Vice President of Sales and Business Solutions for a pharmacy benefit manager known as Elixir. We are actually owned by Rite Aid. And like Brandon, I am also a father. I'm not an adventurous, though. I wouldn't say that. I do love to play golf, and I'm also a husband where actually Friday I celebrated my 15th wedding anniversary. So it's great to be here.
And Jeff?
Hi, Jeff Michaelzik, also proud husband. I've got 16-year-old and 14-year-old daughters, all at home on Zoom calls with me today, although they're doing school while we're doing the TEI symposium. I've also got a brother-in-law living with me who's also on a Zoom call, and I think my wife was as well. So I think 5 people in the house on Zoom calls is certainly a record in my house, and it happens to be on this day. Also have a dog and a cat, which you might see make a cameo in this as we go forward. I work for CIBC, so I run a group of both of commercial bankers. One of my teams focuses on commercial and industrial businesses, mostly middle market type businesses. And then I have 2 other teams that focus on specialty lending areas, one in commercial finance and the other in consumer finance. It's a pretty broad group of, I'll call relationship managers and salespeople working for me. And it's been an interesting last number of months. So I look forward to talking about it.
Terrific. And Scott Pemberton?
Yeah, my name's Scott Pemberton, and Phil and I work together at his firm. And we do several things. We do consultative sales training and process development. We'll talk a little bit about process today, which is very important. We do appointment setting for salespeople, usually by phone. We do marketing communications, and we also have a new practice area in sales and marketing alignment, which we'll also talk a little bit about today, because that seems to be more important. And one of the things we try to do in all our interactions is help our clients and even our prospects to try to deliver value there, identify their points of differentiation. We run into companies all the time who they know so much about their business and industry, they don't think they have any differentiation, but they do. And these days, it's even more important, I think, to figure out how to, what that is, and how to use messaging to get that across. It's a matter of efficiency, if nothing else. And I have 3 kids. They're grown and they're all gone, although we do stay in touch. And like they say, you never stop being a parent. Brandon, that's been my main adventure. And, I'm not looking for much else at this point. So.
And I'm Phil Crone. I'm the president, founder of Productive Strategies. We're a 27-year-old sales process and marketing firm, as Scott mentioned. Just a little housekeeping. If you'd like to just have a view of who's speaking, you can go to the upper right-hand corner and click Speaker View, or you can leave the panel that shows who's participating today and shows the picture of all the panelists. The way the program will go this noon is we'll be asking the panelists to answer a couple questions. We'll have 2 rounds of questions for the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions you may want to ask the panel about sales and marketing business development in this period of COVID and station in place. So I'm going to start out by asking Jeff, what differences have been brought to the market because of this COVID-19? Jeff, you're on mute. There we go.
Can you hear me now? Perfect.
Yes.
Frankly, it's just been a lot harder. As a salesperson and running a team of salespeople, early on in the COVID experience, it was almost felt insensitive to call on new prospects and to do the job that we were defined doing. You know, we were out really calling on our existing clients and open to calls as they would come in. But, you know, as the pandemic has gone through and we're getting back to reality of we need to be out and truly doing our job, marketing and selling, we've had to really change the way that we go about what we do. And I think it's been probably some changes that will be better for us in the long haul. You know, I think one thing is for certain, we can't rely on our charm and rapport in the same way that we probably would in the past. I think some salespeople get so good at reading interpersonal skills, they can do such a good job of developing relationship on the spot that they can overcome maybe some deficiencies with respect to sales planning and some of the harder work of really getting into what does this business need? What are their values? How do I tap in and really try to figure out how I can solve for those needs and achieve those values? And so it's really been almost a mindset change where we've focused a lot more on pre-call planning and really understanding the different pieces of the sales process and not taking anything for granted. You know, it's felt in many ways like interactions used to be natural, meaning you would have a call to set up the meeting, and that meeting you would then have a pretty natural next step in the process. I think clients we've felt during this time period have wanted to condense everything. You jump on a Zoom call and they want to get everything done. And I think early on we kind of fell into the trap of we're going to try to solve every problem right now, instead of really recognizing the sales process needs to have some spacing and time to it. And really you need to focus on and make sure you get through the rapport building part first before you move on to and have really the right to get into the needs assessment part of the business. So I think for us, I think it's just been a recognition of we need to be more thoughtful about the entire process. And I think we're going to be better for it in the future, but it's definitely been fits and starts getting there. And you know, I would say that it's been a wake-up call.
Okay, and Brandon, maybe you can tell us some of the best practices that you're observing both within your own company and with your clients that are growing.
So I think this has been a tremendous opportunity for good salespeople to take what Jeff has talked about those interpersonal ability to build relationships and say, okay, how do we build these relationships in a COVID area and in a virtual arena? So for instance, you'll see some salespeople when they get into meetings, they'll get into meetings and they get meetings like this, and they're talking like down to their prospects and they're looking down at you because their computer is like all the way down here. And I think that's just like, hey, would you ever talk down to your prospect if you were sitting in the room? Or you'll see them talking to somebody and they'll be in a meeting and all of a sudden you see this like come up. I don't know if you guys can see this coming up in front of my face. Yeah, would you ever be talking to someone, have your phone come up and be talking and texting to somebody? Heck no. Like, there are so many ways to utilize technology through chat, through researching now on people's LinkedIn, and people are willing to get on the phone and willing to get into these Zoom meetings. That what we've been able to see is that traditional salespeople that would have a milk run and they'd go and visit 2 or 3 current accounts, we're having people able to hit 5, 6, 7, 8 appointments a day. If you look at our own company from a marketing standpoint, now, I mean, we're a small marketing agency. We brought on 6 new clients in 2019. During the past 5 months of this COVID area, we've brought on 13 new clients. So 6 in 2019 and 13 just in the past 5 months. And so I think it's just a huge like wake up call that if you can take what Jeff talked about, the interpersonal skills, and take your sales planning and take what you already do well from a sales standpoint, that Zoom and this virtual selling world is forcing salespeople to put those tricks, if you will, and that actual good planning to work. And I think that the good salespeople are experiencing more sales, and the weaker salespeople are just falling apart, and that's leaving more opportunity for good salespeople. So quality good sales planning, I think, will really help. Now, I see a question from Floyd that asked, what about having video off? That happens a lot when people, and I've done webinars on this, like selling virtually. When people jump in, I think it's important to say, hey, would you mind turning on your video? You know, I've been on Zoom today, I've been on phone calls, and I'd like to be able to see you and meet you. And then the next meeting, say, hey, let's turn our videos off and let's all go outside and let's take our call and just use audio if we can, and go for a walk and have a walk and talk or something like that, and being able to change it up. So I think that utilizing the technology, but acting more as like a sports broadcaster of, hey, how are we going to orient this meeting, and how are we going to tell, like almost like a coach, how are we going to tell people, and here's how we're going to run, and Jeff, we're going to call on you, and then Phil, we're going to go to you. I think we have the ability to run much more efficient sales calls and much more efficient meetings. And because there's so many weak salespeople out there that aren't adapting to this, that the good salespeople are actually experiencing higher levels of sales. And that's what we're seeing across the manufacturing distribution sector with our clients. That's what we're seeing with our marketing firm. Yeah, and so and I see one other question, how has the panel addressed Zoom fatigue? Zoom fatigue is a real thing. And I think you need to call out and ask people, hey, so for one thing, if you book a Zoom meeting for an hour, tell people, hey, we're going to only run this meeting for 45 minutes or 50 minutes, because the last 10 minutes of every Zoom meeting is when all of the key things get assigned and all the important stuff. And that's when everyone else is also prepping for their next meeting, and they're turning their video off so they can go to the bathroom while they still have their headphones in, and no one knows they're really going to the bathroom because they've got 5 hours of Zoom calls. So I think being cognizant of saying, hey, we're only running this meeting, we're going to book it for an hour, we're only going to run it for 50 minutes, I'm going to give you the last 10 minutes to prep for your next meeting, allows people to stay more focused on those meetings. And I can go on and on and on, but Phil, I'll turn it back to you.
I'm going to add one tip on best practices. There's a natural tendency when you're meeting with someone to look at them. So there's a tendency to want to look down on the screen to see all the faces of who you're talking to. But to really make good eye contact, you want to look right into the camera. And that's something that doesn't seem natural to us, because we want to do what I'm about to do, look down and see Rob and Dean and Chip and John, but really I should be looking at the camera. And some people find it's good to put a picture of their kids up right behind the camera, so that reminds them and energizes them when they're talking on the Zoom call. John, let's move to you. How does artificial intelligence play into all of this with video conferencing?
Yeah, so that is a great question, Phil. And I know from my perspective, artificial intelligence has become absolutely a necessity for our success. And what I mean by that is I work at a Fortune 100 company, right? So we have opportunities that essentially present themselves from different spectrums, from small group all the way up to large group. And when I define that, I'm talking about the employee size. So you could have like 50 employees all the way up to 80,000 employees. But ultimately, what we've learned and what we found is within our databases, within the tools that we have, Brandon was talking a little bit about different tools and techniques, artificial intelligence is absolutely a necessity. So we literally are able to take and look at opportunities, weight our actual opportunity development, look at the opportunity development, make sure that it aligns with the needs, and essentially do a much deeper dive. And it becomes and makes us more efficient. So it also has helped us, and I'm going to go back to what Jeff said, is it's prep, right? And if that's how I wrote it down when I was listening to him. And ultimately, artificial intelligence allows you to better prepare, and it allows you to get your message more fine-tuned in the overall aspect. So we've used it not only on our clinical side, from understanding what the member interaction is, but we've also used it on an opportunistic side, all the way through trying to capture a new client. So there's a lot of opportunity here. It's very scary though. I would say it was a adjustment for us as an organization to allow something else to embrace that process and help us guide through that process. But I would tell you, understand it, embrace it, and try to find the right solution, because there's many, many solutions when it comes to artificial intelligence.
John, maybe you could elaborate on how you use artificial intelligence to qualify leads.
Sure. So when we qualify a lead, you know, just like normal, any other sales process, we're doing our cold calling, we're doing the aspect of trying to find out what that organization is doing from a pharmacy perspective, because everything I do is pharmacy benefits related. And ultimately, we're trying to walk through and figure out what are the needs, what are the aspects of solutions, and can we essentially win, or can we provide the services that are needed. But then we're also looking at our win rate within that organization, or with the brokers and consultants, because there's a third level to my organization. I call on direct employers, but then I also have to engage with consultants and brokers. So I can take and weight what the brokers and consultants and my win rate is there with the needs of that client or that prospect. Basically bring those two together, do a deep dive into the analytics, and essentially determine what my win rate potential would be. That's not to say I can't service you, but it actually helps me in defining, as both Brandon and Jeff said too, defining that we're actually offering the right solution set to you and become a better salesperson. So.
Scott, how does the alignment between sales and marketing fit in with the communications required for video conferencing? Or you're on mute, Scott. There we go.
Committed the basic sin here. So in general, I think alignment is really important these days, even more than it usually is. I think a lot of companies kind of pay lip service to that, and they really don't leverage it in any formal way. We have a client that uses its Salesforce as a market research tool in addition to selling. And a lot of people say, yeah, we do that. What's different about these people is they're salespeople. When they're out in the field talking to customers, suppliers, whoever, they have questions that they ask. Not a lot of them, but what it does is it enables them to understand better what's happening in the marketplace before their competitors do. And they happen to be a software development company. They are always ahead of their competitors. Salespeople don't just ask the questions. There's a formal process when they come back from the field or from video conference calls these days. There's a formal process they go through to get the answers to marketing, to get it to new product development, all the way down the line. So I think, process is going to be very important here. Communicating with sales and communicating with marketing back and forth will improve efficiency all the way around. So how do you do that a little bit? I think the basics really still apply. And I think the same things essentially in selling. You need to meet with each other internally, regularly, and formally. You can have informal meetings also, but it's very important that the marketing and the salespeople are essentially speaking the same language, that they know, that they're sure they're on the same page, that they're communicating about their customers or prospects within the buying process. Where are they in this process? And, there's so many ways this can go wrong. And it really, without regular communications, they're going to go wrong. What marketing has a great idea for promotion and they send it out. Well, what happens with sales? People are calling and saying, what about this? Am I going to get this discount? How can I get this? And on the surface, you think, well, that would never happen. Well, yeah, it happens. And it's not infrequent. It's nobody's fault except it's the process's fault. And there was an interesting book out a few years ago all about lists and how valuable they are. Incredible stuff in medicine, just the doctors and nurses going through checklists and reducing the errors and, improving recovery times. Absolutely the same. It's very similar to quality control processes. You look at each step, you identify each step, you see whether it's necessary, you improve it or get rid of it, and you keep that sort of continual type of improvement. So I think, that's the basics. Each company is going to have its own techniques, its own needs, but that's one of what you've got to find out. What does marketing really need? What does sales really need? How can they help each other?
Hey, Phil, can I jump in on that a second?
Sure, Jeff.
Absolutely, please.
So I think I would echo what Scott just said. This is, this new normal that we have, right? Where we're all staring at a screen. And I love the question about Zoom fatigue, and I'm going to try and work that in here in a second. But I think what Scott hit on is so important. If I had to go back when COVID first started, or even prior to, as the leader of my sales organization, I have basically about 15 individuals who report to me throughout the United States. And it was interesting, when we were all in offices, we made time for each other, even though we were remote in different areas. Then all of a sudden COVID comes in, and for some reason we froze, but we literally, you didn't follow a process. It's like all the process that you followed before, for some reason you decided, hey, I can't follow that process because now I got to stare at a screen. But reality was, you were staring at a phone, right? And you had a formalized process. You had a formal agenda. You had a prep session. You had steps that you were taking. And I think people don't realize that in the sales world and in this new normal that we have, you still have to have those basic elements, because like Scott was saying, marketing going off and doing what they need, and then sales going, wait a second, and trying to catch up. In that old world, you constantly talked. You made sure, I have to make sure that sales knows what marketing is trying to do, so on and so forth. So I think it's so important to make sure to tell your teams and to recognize with your teams, it's a new normal, but don't forget the basics. And don't be afraid. We've actually said this about Zoom fatigue. I want to share this story very quickly. My CEO actually got on a call and said, we were doing this right around lunchtime, and said, so I have a question for all of you. We're like, yes. And she goes, can we eat while we're on Zoom? And everybody went, what? She goes, can we eat while we're on Zoom? And people raised their hands and said, well, no, that's impolite. It's like, okay, but we're sitting in the boardroom, or we're sitting in a room. Yes, thank you, colleague. We're sitting in a boardroom, and what are we doing? I'm eating my lunch, I'm doing whatever. She goes, it's life. You have to make it as life. So don't forget the basics. And I think that also helps in the fatigue aspect. So sorry, Phil, I know I kind of took us off a tangent, but at the same time, I think it's important that we got to remember, this whole process is about structure and about preparation and about being respectful to yourself as well.
Great additions. I'm going to throw myself a comment, and anybody feel free on the panel to add to it about what has become easier. I think Brandon mentioned, maybe Jeff, that more people are available. To me, the biggest thing that's made it easier to sell this way is that you can do team selling, which has always been a terrific resource for many reasons, but it was very expensive. If you ever had IBM call on you, or a major corporation, they always sent two guys. And the reason for that is one guy could be running the meeting, the other guy could be reading the room, he could be answering technical questions, he can be asking the question that the lead has forgotten to ask, a great discovery question. And so what we're beginning to see among our clients is, one of our clients used to be only selling one of their many products per salesperson. So Now what they're doing is they're saying, hey, you are now going to sell all the products. If you need a product specialist to come in on the call with you, it's easy. You're only taking an hour, half an hour of his time. Give him the time zone, give him the time. He's on the call. You can have a sales coach on the phone. You can have a sales manager sitting in on more of the calls. You can have a consultant who helps close a deal, which we do as one of our services. It's much less expensive for us to do it for our clients now, join in on sales calls. So another example is where you've had a salesman in a territory calling on someone. Now there's a shift and there's a new salesman. You can have the older salesman who has the relationship, the newer salesman who's just coming up, make that call together, and it's a whole lot less expensive than it would have been with feet on the street. I don't know if any of the panelists have anything to add to that. Brandon,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so glad you talked about this, Phil, because I think that this has created such a great opportunity for our clients in the manufacturing distribution space. What we're finding is, you talked about that cost of getting multiple people. Well, what we're seeing is now the speed to quote is also been really shortened. And I think that the companies that are realizing, hey, we have our formal process of, okay, we have to go out, we have to tour, then we have to send an engineer, then we have to work with estimating, then we have to work with project management. Like they've been able to collapse that process from a time frame, and our speed to quote now has shrunk from months to weeks. And the faster we can get, if a prospect is interested in buying, the faster we can get, in that window of their interest, and get them a quote and get them through that process. I think the companies are experiencing a huge lift from that as well. So I'm so glad you talked about the team selling, bringing in the multiple product engineers and product specialists, because it's all about serving the customer better. And when we as companies show up, even in the sales process, and serve our customers better with more information and quicker, better answers, like that's what this virtual selling has allowed us to be able to do.
That's
Yeah,
terrific.
I'll piggyback on that too, if that's okay. I mean, for us, team selling has always been a major part of what we do. You're going to sign up with a bank, you really want to know that there's more than just your relationship manager supporting you. And this has allowed us to have executives and others on calls that wouldn't have been able to do so otherwise, especially if these calls are out of town. I mean, it's a really neat tool for that perspective. It also takes away some of the monotony of a call, having multiple people there and anticipating a reading, because it is so hard to read people in a Zoom. If you've got more people there anticipating and everybody knows their role and everybody's prepped, it can be a really, really powerful tool. And it's worked really well for us. I think we've been as successful calling on Zooms as we have been otherwise. So apologize for the cameo for the cat. Brandon was joking with me privately earlier. How'd I keep her on my shoulder like a pirate? It's funny. She's my kid's cat, but she likes me the best and I'm allergic to her.
So can I add on to Jeff's comment too real quick? It really goes with this team selling. I know we got to keep this moving along, but in my environment of pharmacy, we typically have very limited people that we can bring out on the road, right, with us from a team selling perspective. Our resources are stretched. We have one finalist meeting in the West Coast. We have one finalist meeting on the East Coast. They may fall into the same segment because we work in a lot of segment business. So having this technology and the ability to schedule someone on the East Coast and the West Coast to cover both, and be able to actually put the person that's going to service the account right on camera, has been an absolute advantage for us, because we're able to, it's always a requirement where our prospects and our clients want to see who they're going to work with. Well, now you can see who you're going to work with. And to Phil's point originally, I mean, I'm sitting in Florida and you're all up in, in the Midwest. So.
It's a great point. And Jeff, I want to go back to you and ask, are there any parts of the sales process that you see the bank doing differently because of this, whether it's prospecting, qualifying, discovery, anything?
Yeah, so prospecting, I think people have had time to sit and reassess where they are good, where they have the knowledge, where they can bring some value to a situation. The number of lists that are out there, and I know everybody's pouring through them and really analyzing and honing in. I would say if you're not doing that, I would start doing that, because your competitors are doing that, and some of the empty time, especially early on during COVID, really honing in and trying to find the right lists of prospects, and now starting to get into the real calling efforts again on those clients. So we certainly have focused a lot on prospecting, making sure that we truly are calling on targeted companies and individuals that we really can bring value to. Discovery, I think I already talked about a lot of the pre-call planning that's been in place, and really it's the roles of the team with respect to that, I think, has been really important to that process. And knowing that we can't read the room as much, knowing that we need to do a bit more research on some of the hot buttons that might be important to this company, those are the things we're doing in the discovery process. The presentation, I just think, and I mentioned it early on, I just think even though it's condensed process, you really have to separate out the different aspects of the sales process. The needs discovery, all of those things need to have their place. And I think to try to jam everything into a single meeting on Zoom, which I think is often what people try to do, I think you're missing something in the sales process. And I think it's harder to really build that true partner relationship by trying to do that. So, for us, it's really trying to push towards a follow-up meeting to then further on the topics that we've discussed already. And then in closing, I think you have to ask. You always have to ask, and you have to be able to. You have to earn the right to ask, but you want to win that business, and there's got to be a place where you do it. So if you've done everything right beforehand, I think you naturally get to that place where you can ask. In this process, we've had a couple situations where we've lost. And we've lost where we thought we were going to win. We probably would have won had we been in person, just because I think we do a really good job of that overall presentation. But in both cases, the bank that had won didn't get the deal done in the way that they wanted to. And rather than going back to a bunch of banks, they came back to us and said, we'd like to move forward with you because you asked us the right questions. You really got to know our business in this process. And so I think there is real value in just making sure that you don't forget that there is a there's a psychological aspect to clients wanting to make a decision to do business with you. And it's not just about, can you provide the product to them the cheapest? It's this relationship that's built, and there's this value that's discovered through the process of understanding their needs and desires and wants. And I think if you can do that process correctly, I think more often than not you're going to win. But if you don't win and something happens, it's going to come back your way. So hopefully that answers your question. Long-winded, maybe.
No, it does. It's a great answer. And the one thing about preparation, when you're making the prospecting call in the old days, it was to set up an in-person meeting. And then you had a week or 10 days to plan all the discovery questions for that meeting. What can happen, and you referred to it, is that the prospect says, well, let's just hold the meeting right now. So all the more reason that if you do get pulled into it, you have prepared what would have been the face-to-face meeting while you're making the cold call. Brandon, I want to go back to you and just talk about some of the things you've seen as companies transition from 100% field sales to doing more online selling. Any other best practices or things that have to be changed as you make that transition?
Yeah, I think we still need to utilize the different tools that traditional good sales people do. So I have a virtual background of my home office here that I'll put up. And so when I'm in my home office, I took a picture of the home office. So literally that's a virtual background. But I call out the pink, people notice the pink chair, or they notice the TRX here, or they notice the map of the world and places we've traveled as a family. And so I use these props, if you will, in the building rapport from a sales standpoint. And then the other background you saw is actually a picture of our office that has our mission, our vision, and our values. And I use that and put that up and talk about, hey, these are the mission, vision, values of our organization. And that allows our prospects to talk about, okay, how does that align to their mission, vision, and values? So still all good, solid sales techniques. The other things I try to do, I posted in the chat here, crisp.ai. If you can hear right now, you probably can't hear me clapping, right? You can see me clapping. You probably can't hear me clapping, and it's cutting out all the background noise. Crisp.ai, I posted in the chat. And it's been a fantastic tool if you have an 8-month-old like I do, who likes to scream when you're in like the epic, ready to sell like moment of your prospect, and she likes to lose her stuff. And so she starts screaming, and that cuts out all the background noise. But I think with the companies that we've worked with, We've had a sales force that was so used to just showing up and walking in, and now because of COVID, they can't get on site, and it's forcing them to be much more specific with their questions and be much more inquisitive with what are the companies doing to grow and thrive. And I saw a question was posted in the chat earlier about, hey, how do you address the companies that want to put their heads down in the sand a little bit, or don't see positive? And I think from a sales standpoint, the companies that are going to grow, the companies that are willing to fight through this and grow, are going to be the companies that are going to survive, because COVID is going to decimate weak companies. Any natural disaster, any major event that happens, weak companies don't deserve to thrive. Like, they don't deserve to thrive. We shouldn't be propping them up. It's the strong companies that are willing to plan, willing to fight, willing to go out and find ways to innovate and grow and learn, are going to be the companies that survive. And when we're selling, I would like to believe that everyone on this call, everyone in this meeting, is selling something that helps companies thrive, that helps companies grow, that helps companies become better versions of themselves. Which, if you're out there helping companies become better, then you should be trying to call on as many prospects as you can, because you have something that helps these companies survive and get through this. And in which case, I think all the more reason we should be fired up to be talking to and meeting with as many people as we can. And what Zoom is allowing, or any virtual Microsoft Teams, whatever you use, is allowing us to do, is to share more of our message with more people. My father's a sales trainer, and he once told me, he said, Brandon, when you go into selling something, I want you to approach it like this. He said, imagine you're driving down the road and you drive over like a pothole, and you stop and you're looking back, and that pothole is full of gold coins. And you start pulling out and you fill up your trunk, and your trunk is full and there's still more gold coins. And all you can think of is to drive to your friend's house as fast as you can and get them to come back and get more of those gold coins out of that pothole and throw it back in their trunk and come. Like, that's how excited you are, because it's going to help them and it's going to help you. So we've got liquid gold, and our companies have an ability to help other companies grow and thrive. And if you're that excited about sharing this gold, sharing these solutions, sharing what you have with these people, they're going to buy into that. They're going to see it. And I think that's what's going to help your company grow and help their company ultimately grow and survive and get through this.
Well, it's a great perspective, because some people fear that sales is manipulation, and it certainly isn't. If your pure whole mission is making the life better of the buyer you're dealing with, then you can have the energy and the passion that Brandon just referred to. John, let's jump to the presentation part of the process. How is the video conferencing enabling you to bring analytics into the sales process?
So the video aspect and analytics and how it all works together, it's actually allowing us to do more on the fly. And what I mean by that is this: we do a lot of claims analysis. So I ask for every prospect to send us detailed files on their claims experience and what they're experiencing when it comes to pharmacy benefit spend, just to put this in perspective. What our team does is we do a preliminary review of that data, and we have our presentations, we have our normal decks where we show savings, we show all the different aspects of how pharmacy is supposed to work. But as questions arise, and we've seen this in many of the meetings that we've had, finalist meetings, even prep meetings, preliminary meetings prior to a selection process, where someone has asked us, well, if we were to change this drug, or we were to change our plan design, our copay and plan design by X amount, could you tell us what that effect is going to be? Prior, I would have to say, yeah, let me go back. I will get that. I'll send this to you in 24 hours. And it's because I had to go and make a phone call, right? Or I had to send an email that night to my analytics team and have them plug and play everything. And they were doing it right when I asked. But now I can have that person sitting in the background and say, hold on 1 second, let's make that adjustment. And literally show their screen or show a different screen, and they can watch all the analytics being applied and all the different aspects of the changes that the prospect or the client wants right away. So it's turned a near real-time process to a real-time process, and an extreme advantage for us, because we're able to explain what our service model is in a much quicker fashion.
That's a great point. We call that a nonlinear presentation. You might bring in a case history, you might bring in a product expert, or you might bring in data, a pro forma data, as you're talking about. Scott, what are some of the pros and cons of video conferencing selling?
Well, as you can imagine, there's a lot of both, but I kind of tend to look at the pros, because many of them can actually, many of the traditional things you try to do in a in-person sales call, such as build trust, build relationship, this can be done in a video situation as well. It's just the techniques are a little different. Like Brandon is bringing in his personality. He's bringing in, the corporate philosophy and that type of thing. And let's face it, if they are paying attention, they're very focused on you, right? If you're talking, they can't really cut away very easily. But the other thing you can do that's kind of a universal is to ask questions, and ask obviously the right kinds of questions. One of the things we say is, if you slow down the sales process, similar to what Jeff is saying, you can speed up the sale. And that means getting the right information that allows you to know what are these this company's objectives, what are the problems they have in achieving those objectives, and if they actually achieve them or don't achieve them, what is that going to mean to the company? And that's a terrific way to build relationship and move the sale ahead as well. In other words, you don't have to be playing golf. You don't have to find out that both of you like fishing. That can come later, which is not to say, that type of interaction isn't important. But you can do this with the right types of questions. And I think, one of the reasons Brandon has had success with reducing the sales cycle time, bringing more people in, is you're kind of forced to be more efficient. You need to get to the point faster. And, like Jeff was saying, both the prospect and the seller gets to see, who's involved and, what they're all about. Phil, I just want to address one question I saw come up in chat. And I don't know a lot about this, but it's worth addressing. There's still in-person meetings going on. What happens when you're invited to an in-person meeting and you have COVID at work? Meaning, what about masks? What about social distancing? What kind of precautions do you need to take? Well, the basic advice I have on that, if you're going to a client's location, which as we all know is usually ideal, call ahead, ask them, what do you like to see in these types of meetings? What issues have you been having? How can we, accommodate you? I don't think there's very many things that can be done, but wearing a mask, obviously that's a difficulty when you're trying to communicate.
We've done quite a bit of in-person meetings, and it's only been if first and foremost, my relationship managers are comfortable going, and I would say three-fourths of my employees, I would say, would feel comfortable doing a meeting of some sort. Half of those would only be comfortable if it was outside, the other half inside, and the others just wouldn't do it at all. And we've just made it very clear that, we obviously want to try to accommodate the client if we can, and those that are willing to go and meet, if a client wants to do it, we will go and meet, but only if the setting is going to be appropriate. And we'll have that conversation. And that's kind of the part of the discovery process that I think we have with each of these clients. What is the best way that you'd like to interact with us?
No, that's a terrific kind
just
of
to add to that, when we have clients coming to visit us, we have a room that's set up with plexiglass dividers. We have a limit of how many people can be in that room. It's 6. And between the plexiglass and the distance, it's a large boardroom. We can make everybody feel safe, and we ask them to wear masks on their way to that special room. Speaking of special rooms, we have several clients that are distributors and manufacturers who have built video conference rooms to make their calls from. And they've got samples in that room that they can refer to if they need to show something on camera, but they've perfected the boom mic, the lighting, the quality of the internet connection. They made that room a world-class room for having a virtual meeting. But I think if you're going to have an in-person meeting, you ask a lot of good questions, just like you do when you're going to go to a motel. Call that motel and find out, what is your policy? How many days do you leave between renting to one person and the next? What's the cleaning procedure? And I found from travel that there's a wide range, even within a chain. All Marriotts are not the same. And if you call that motel, you can find out what their procedures are for protecting against the virus. I'd like to open it up now to people in the participating here in the session to ask questions that you might have. Feel free to put them in chat or take yourself off of mute and ask a question. Wait a minute for one of those to come in. If we don't have one, let me ask the audience a question. What's been the most difficult part of this transition for you and your sales team? Anybody'd like to answer, feel free to take yourself off of mute. Okay, we have one question here about uncertainty in the marketplace and the fear of what's going to happen. Any of the panelists have a comment on that?
You know, many of our clients have different perspectives on that. And, you know, we're sensitive when we're having those conversations about, again, going back to whether they're comfortable meeting, whether they're not comfortable meeting, what kinds of needs that they have that have arisen because of COVID that we might be able to address. And sometimes we can't address it, but I think where we've been really good is identifying others and other types of service providers that can address things that maybe we can't address during this time period. So we viewed ourselves not only as, you know, potentially their banker, but also as their gatekeeper partner, you know, trying to make sure that we do everything we can to help them in terms of what their current needs are. And it may not be selling our product right now, but if we do the right things now for them, maybe sometime in the future, whether it be a year or 2 years down the road, we might be the right partner for them during that time period. So that's maybe a broad way to answer that question, but I think it's really dependent upon the underlying client's situation and viewpoints and needs.
Yeah, it seems to me that's a great way to begin a relationship too. It's another way of saying, you know, other than just how's business or you know, what do you think of the market type of thing. Each industry is going to be affected differently. So it's a real legitimate question to say, you know, have your objectives changed with respect to the market? How have your markets changed? Are there new issues there that you have to deal with you haven't had to deal with before? So, you know, uncertainty can be, you know, an advantage in that case.
So from a healthcare perspective,
yes.
Yeah, just to chime in on that, from a healthcare perspective, being in the pharmacy space, people have asked, are you going to cover for the COVID shot when it comes out? What's the plan? You know, and talk about an interesting conversation. They've transitioned from costs of $1 million drugs to the uncertainty of how am I going to deal with people coming into my office and COVID, and what are we going to do there? What's the cost going to be? So it's definitely changed the market, but it's also been a good entree in the healthcare space because everybody needs to talk about it and understand it and get different perspectives. But we're able to then bring them right back to, you know, the other aspects of the benefit itself.
Addressing the uncertainty question again, we decided when this first started to happen that we had to change our course from being just taught in person to being able to offer it online. And just like Brendan talked about, there's going to be winners and losers. We found that actually there's greater demand for our service now that we're offering it online because it leverages the time of their salespeople. They knew in the back of their mind they wanted to upgrade their communication skills. make them more consultative sellers. And now was an opportunity. So we're going to be busier in the fourth quarter than we've ever been in our history. And I think if you can look at this as an opportunity to change what you're doing, hone it, deliver it different, go about it a little different way, you can be excited about the possibilities. And we decided that it was important for our clients to feel that optimism. So we've done some columns that we send out where we just call some of our clients and say, hey, tell us the good news of what's going on, and then put that in the column so that other people see, hey, the world's not coming to an end. Amazon's going to have the best year ever. Apple's going to have the best year ever. There's a lot of people that are going to do very well. And like any other time in business, you might have to change something to adapt. But the winners are going to become better winners. And one of the reasons that's true goes back to the sales process. The people who relied on joke telling and just trying to become friends with the buyer, they're going to be at a greater disadvantage than the seller who was a true consultative seller who knew how to bring value before he supplied a product, before he supplied a service. He created value within the sales process. Those people are doing even better now because, going back to what Brandon said, they have more time to make more calls. They're positive about what they're doing. They're creating value, and the result is more revenue.
Phil, let me just mention one thing to people who are concerned about losing the personal touch, from less in-person selling. We were quite concerned about our course because it's small. There's a lot of individual interaction, and that is one of the strengths of why it works. We really haven't lost very much by going, to an online platform, which was a big surprise to us. So it's kind of an indication that you can do the same thing when you find yourself having to sell, through video conferencing rather than, in person.
I want to piggyback on what Scott just said. We had a woman, a CEO, go through our focus selling program last year. And then this year, she decided to put her whole sales team through the program. So she's the only person who's actually taken the course both ways. And we do have a policy that if anybody's ever taken our course, they can retake it at no charge anytime in the future, as long as they're still working for our client. And that's been a wonderful differentiator for us. Well, I called her last week when her second going through the class finished. And I said, you're the only person we have to ask this to, because you're the only person that's done it both ways. Which did you like better? And she said, I like the online better for two reasons. I like, instead of the 4-hour sessions, you double the number of sessions and cut it to 2 hours. That made it easier for me to break away and do. But second of all, I like the fact that I didn't have to fly my whole team in from both coasts and incur the expense and the added health risk of bringing them in. So the health risk there, in effect, is helping because people don't want people in their plant from the outside, especially the states with a poor experience. So it's a small sample size, but there's one person who actually thought it was a better experience. I'd like to see some questions come in on the chat, but if you're not familiar with doing it that way and you'd like to just take yourself off of mute, we'd love to hear from you.
Phil, I've got, one thing that I've seen from some successful companies in this marketplace is, and some of them have been the ones that haven't fared as well, where their traditional selling avenue has not been the best place to go. Just the willingness to change and pivot and to think about how their product or service or selling approach really can work for another offshoot or another segment. And I've seen several examples of companies being resilient in that way and really figuring out how to change very rapidly. And I think that skill set is going to be an important one even in the future, as we have this uncertainty that's going to be here for quite some time, industry segments are changing. The right way into certain businesses isn't going to be the same as it was before. I just think just the building a resilient mindset within your organization and pivoting and moving away from what has been your core to other areas where you have strengths, it, you know, is something that has been successfully navigated by a number of companies during this time period. And
I'll
those
give you a
businesses, I think,
great
will be.
example of that. We have a client, Feed My Starving Children, that many of you may know of. They have 1.4 million volunteers a year who help come in for 2-hour increments and pack food. And it becomes a self-sustaining model because the volunteers tend to contribute money to pay for the food they packed, and that enables us to give the food to missionaries around the world. Well, 10 packing facilities in the United States had to be shut down mid-March. So all of a sudden, you've got 30 million meals a month in the backlog that have to be sent to people starving around the world. You've lost all your volunteers and you've lost your main source of income. The company had always said they'd never do machine packing because they wanted the involvement of the volunteer who then felt a need to contribute to pay for what he packed. In 9 days, they pivoted, got food packed by one of their suppliers automatically by machine. First product came off the line in 9 days. Now they have to replace the donations. So they're going back to the 1.4 million people who have packed and donated in the past and said, we don't need you to pack right now, but we still need you to donate because we've got another 30 million meals that are being requested beyond what we had budgeted for the year. And they also found a prison that was able to pack food during the pandemic. And now the social distancing, they've been able to open back up, but they still can't have as many people in the packing sessions. So now they're doing packing by machine and by hand, but that's a great example of the pivot. And
Bill?
Brandon, any of your clients that have pivoted like that?
Yeah, and instead of talking about a client, I think I'm going to talk about just a local restaurant that I saw in St. Louis, Missouri, and that's that every business right now has been disrupted, and with disruption creates tremendous amount of opportunity for good companies to help those companies that have been disrupted. And in St. Louis, I don't know how it is where everyone else is, but in St. Louis, it was mandatory shutdown of all restaurants, and it was takeout only. You know, nobody was allowed to come inside at all. And there's a restaurant called Katie's Pizzeria, and they quickly pivoted and started creating, making pizzas and freezing them, and then selling frozen pizzas. Well, about 2 weeks into this endeavor, they sent an email out and said, we have so many requests for frozen pizzas, we cannot take any more orders for the next 5 days because we have such a backlog. And other questions, yes, we'll be opening up an online only frozen pizza and start distributing nationwide. And so this company now, this restaurant whose business was forced to close down, is now doing more revenue in frozen pizzas than they were just in traditional people walking in. And I think if you're a business, if you're looking at how does my service or how does my product help somebody else with their pivot, how does it help them become more resilient during this, they're going to listen, right? Because everyone right now, if you have something that's going to help me save money, become more efficient, if you're going to help my company survive and thrive through this, I'm going to listen to you. You're not just another Joe Blow cold calling me. And so when we call on these companies, I think it's important to make sure we're asking our qualifying questions, but then sharing how our company is going to help this next company, our prospect, thrive and grow throughout this. And I just think right now there are too many people that are in sales that are thinking, my customers don't want to sell, my customers don't want to buy, I feel bad calling on them. And they're putting their own heads in the sands. And it's like, no, people are looking for solutions. And something Scott said earlier really, I think is so true, that even if right now, let's say they're not in a cash position to be able to buy from you, that getting to build a rapport with them, getting to know them, people will forget what you said next week, right? We can have a conversation. You'll forget what I said next week, but you'll never forget how I make you feel, right? And so if you're calling on someone and your interest is just in, can I sell you something today? No, okay, click. well, they're going to forget about you, right? And they'll remember that company that called me and only cared about trying to sell me something. But if you're calling on a prospect and you're finding any way you can to provide value, whether it's selling and giving your service or just connecting with another resource or sending them something, they're never going to forget that. And that gives you permission to build a relationship with them and sell to them again in the future. But right now, even if your sales and closing aren't at record highs, you should be record high for relationship building right now, because your ability to help people, because people are scared, they don't have answers, they're seeking solutions. Your ability right now to be a problem solver and being able to build a relationship should be at a record high with your prospects.
I'll give you a good example of what you just said. We have a client who went through our startup process for making outbound calls and lead generation for them, and then their business evaporated because of the pandemic. They're a printer, and so they couldn't afford to go forward. So we said, look, don't pay us for the startup process. We'll wait until times get better. In the meantime, I'm going to try and just introduce you to people in my network that I think could partner with you and bring you back some of your volume. So we've just introduced him to a cost reduction specialist who's going to include printing in his quiver of solutions. Our client's a printer. And by putting those two people together, we push back his need for our lead generation service. I think Brandon's absolutely right. He'll remember the fact that we've been trying to help him even more because he doesn't have the money now. Eventually he will. We've known him for years. We've used him as our printer for years. And in the end, we'll have a long-term relationship. And I also want to go back to something Scott said about lists. Kellogg put on a program a couple of weeks ago where they talked about a pre-flight checklist before you go into a video conference. And I'd be interested in anything anybody thinks should be added to it. But one of the things, or some of the things that should be on it are what we did today before this session opened up. Was our computer fully charged? Are we using a wired connection if we can? Go to speedtest.net to test your download and upload speed. Make sure you have 10 or more. And get the lighting right, get the microphone right, create a background that's not distracting. We want the focus on you. And one of the things I just learned from watching one of our clients that's a law firm put on a session entitled, If the Glove Doesn't Fit, You May Be on Mute. It was a whole list of things that lawyers are now doing. They said, be off center. Like right now, I've got the camera right at me, but really, for their advice, I should be sitting where I'm off center, which creates more visual interest. But if anybody has some other items to add to the checklist, I'd be happy to hear them.
Well, Phil, can I just make one point since we're coming up to the end here?
Sure.
I think Jeff's point about resiliency, it's so important right now. And that's where, as CEOs or senior executives, owners, that the people in this room, so to speak, can have huge influence with internal communication. People are very isolated, working at home. Some salespeople, of course, love to work by themselves and be isolated. But you really have to step up your communications efforts to people to make sure they feel involved and unearth some real issues they're having. And it's partially, it goes back, sales and marketing communication. That's one area. They should be treating each other as internal customers and asking the questions they would ask of prospects, in effect, to figure out, how they can help each other ultimately. So anyway, I will plug the engagement breakout we had earlier. It's excellent. Go listen to the recording. Lots of issues about how to deal with people in there.
And Phil, I would tell you this, to add to your list, to go back to that question of the prep list, it's as simple as having a pen. Don't be afraid to take notes. You would take notes in a regular meeting, right? I think a lot of people are so focused on this camera. You know, by trade, I'm actually a broadcasting major in school. So that whole aspect of being off to the side is actually one of those that they teach you right away, is you don't sit in the middle or you get comfortable. Those of us, you'll see a lot of people go like this, they go like that, they go over here, they go. And the one thing that they say is, as you prep and as you get ready, is don't sit in the middle, because you want to give someone something to look at, right? So I just happen to have a couple of things in the back of my office. I have a blank wall, but you know, there's multiple different techniques, but the one thing to remember is just don't sit in the middle, because then they're gonna miss the point of what you're trying to talk about, because you want them to try and focus on you. But also be prepared, have your paper, have your pen, and be ready to, you know, to take those notes. There's nothing wrong with putting your head down and taking notes. So.
And you just made a great point. We've focused on the prep before the call, things to do during the call. And some people say, pretend there's a pole through your head. You can turn your head like that, but don't be going in and out, and don't be going left and right. But one of the most important things after the call, it's even more important than when you've made a face-to-face call, is reconnect after the call with a thank you note, with a copy of your notes. What we teach people to do is take the notes and revise the notes from being chronological notes into a template that's easy to create value for the prospect. I won't go into all the details of how that's done, but sending those notes to your prospect, asking for them to add to it, to comment on what you took down as notes, check on your accuracy, can be extremely powerful. And some of our clients who are the fastest growing in their industry say that that's one of the most important things they do that helps them continue to build a relationship after the call. We're coming up against our hard stop here. I want to remind everybody, when you leave this Zoom session, to go back to the original link that got you on this morning with geniecast.com, the President's Symposium-of-Chicago. I think if I share my screen, you can see that. Maybe you'll even be able to link off of it, but you'll want to close this one out and go back to the main screen